Let's talk about weak leadership. I bring this up because honestly, we don't talk about it enough. And I'm empathetic to the topic because I've been a weak leader. We've all been taught the table stakes about how to be a good leader. And those things are still true. The idea of being a safe person to work with, the idea of servant leadership is still critical. But if you are a servant leader who is safe to work with, that doesn't mean you're a strong leader. Let me explain. There are three things that I consistently find in my coaching practice that get in the way of leaders truly being excellent. And frankly, when they're missing these three things, even if they're servant leaders who are very safe to work with, they're weak. They're the kind of leaders that eventually we all get tired of following. We've all had those moments where we have someone who's a great human, and yet our jobs consistently get harder and harder to do. Over time, we get frustrated and burned out. We get demotivated the longer we work for and under these leaders who aren't doing what they need to do. And let me be blunt. If you're the leader and you have these three gaps, you are the weak leader we're talking about. So let's now talk about the three big indications. The first big indication that you have or are a weak leader is that you're guilty of resulting. Now, resulting is a term that has been introduced into the business vocabulary by Annie Duke, Dr. Annie Duke, to be specific. Annie got her PhD in psychology and then took that into the world of poker and became a World Series of Poker champion. She's brought in over $4 million with her skills. She took her experience and perspective as a professional poker player back into academia and found that many business leaders are guilty of one of the most common sins of professional gambling. And that's resulting. Resulting is this concept where you inject a bias of halos or horns based on the result you achieve. For example, you have a quarter where your business results are awesome. You then go back and say, that's because everybody was awesome and we did a good job. But the very next quarter, you have a horrible business result. And so now you say everybody sucks, everybody's struggling, and nobody's doing their job right. And then the next quarter, you go back up again, and all of a sudden the team is fine. Whether we have the right result or not is a completely different discussion than whether or not we're doing the right things in the right way. You do what you need to do, and you break down what is going well and what is not going well, regardless of the result. And that helps you sustain performance at a high level. When you lose, that's easy to separate. But when you win, it's easy to get lazy. And frankly, there are a ton of weak leaders out there who are looking at the results thinking everything is fine. And the reality is, the skills and the activities that really need to be ensured are not in place. The next moment that a big economic market disruption happens, they're going to be hit like a ship in a bad storm with a bad captain. The ship may be sound, and if you had the right captain on that ship, there'd be no issues. But because you don't have the right leadership for that storm, that ship is going to capsize and bad things are going to happen. So question, are you the kind of leader who evaluates the actions and the skills that your team bring to the business, or are you simply looking at the scorecard at the end of each period? If scores are up, you just let things stay as the status quo. And if scores are down, you suddenly scramble and tell people to work harder. That's weak. The second big indicator of weak leadership is how you lead disruption. And when you have a leader who can only generate disruption and does not know how to calm things down and minimize disruption, that leader will only be effective when the strategy requires disruption. At the same time, if you have a leader who can only minimize disruption and your business needs to pivot, you are not going to do what needs to be done because your leadership will inject bias that will pull you away from the pivot you need to make. How many of you have been in a situation where you know the business had to make some changes and you weren't able to do it? You got caught up in turf wars and debates around what's a priority, what's not a priority. And in the meantime, all of the resources needed to actually execute that strategy are being sucked away and wasted on somebody else's initiative. Even worse, you're not the one seeing the path ahead properly, and you're sucking away resources away from what really needs to be given to the team so that they can be empowered to meet the expectations. This concept of disruption isn't discussed enough, and we have to put that in the center of our conversations with senior leaders, mid-level leaders, and the front lines. Make sure everybody understands that we are here to generate disruption, and if so, how much? Or minimize disruption, and if so, how much? This is critical to how every other decision is going to be made in the organization around prioritization, around goals, around role alignment. Everything else falls underneath this umbrella of what we're doing with disruption. And if you, as the leader, do not have that information, you've just generated a massive weakness in the entire strategy. Which leads us to the third big indication of weak leadership, and that's this. Weak leaders do not know how to create clarity. When you are able to identify fogginess and vague answers to tough questions, you have to be the one who can forge clarity. And your senior leaders need to demand clarity from everything that they do. In fact, I would say it's the number one priority for your success. Think of it this way. One of the worst business jerks that we know in recent history is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was notorious for having weak leadership skills when it came to being safe and a servant leader. At the same time, he was beyond gifted when it came to forging clarity. He could create clarity around what the top priorities were and were not, all the way down to the sound of the box as it was opened when somebody bought their first Apple product. Now, he clearly had to adjust his leadership style to have people around him that help create a safe working environment with some pretty amazing servant leaders, but the lesson is still clear. Clarity matters more than arguably anything else. Because if I take clarity away, there will be no effective empowerment, engagement, accountability, and ultimately a healthy culture. Clarity is the bedrock of great leadership. And if your leaders are not masters of forging clarity, they're weak leaders. And if you're not able to forge clarity, you're a weak leader. If this resonates with you and you want to change that narrative, I encourage you to check out the link in the description that'll take you to my masterclass that will literally go after these points and more to make your leadership and your team thrive. Holo mua, onward and upward.